walking in the rain down on Following Street. I call her name and she stops and she smiles as she turns to me. I say, darling, where you been? She says, you know, Daddy, I've been looking for you. She pops the rear door open and slides into my rear view. And then I puts her arms around me and I put her into gear. I say, where you wanna go? She says, I don't know, just anywhere but here. 'Cause I'm tired of walking down the same old streets every night. I'm tired of the same old faces and the same old sunrise. And I wonder how my mama's doing in Memphis. And I wonder how my kids are up in Michigan. So please, baby, just drive. Carry me out into the night. Carry me out in the night. 'Cause I need to know that there's something more to this life. That there's something more to this moment than this poor town can provide. I feel the pressure, I feel it pushing down on me. I feel like I'm about to scream. I'm feeling low and downright mean. So please, baby, just drive. Please, baby, just drive. I wish there was something I could do. Baby, you've gone too far to come back home. All this time you've been waiting for the world to change. But unfortunately, Anna, unfortunately, Anna, it's you who needs to change. Unfortunately, Anna. Found her walking in the rain down on Following Street. I call her name and she stops and she smiles. She turns to me. She turns to me. She turns to me.
Held high and the seat red back looked like she should be driving something Hello, there we go. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Jay Moye. I'm a local writer and musician, and we are here to celebrate the career and legacy of Justin Townes Earle, who played this very stage many times between 2008 and 2018, if my memory serves. I've got with me Jonathan Bernstein, who drove all the way here from Brooklyn, New York with his dad. He is the author of What Do You Do When You're Lonesome, the Authorized Biography of Justin Townes Earle. It's a fantastic book. I blitzed through it the weekend of the ice storm, if you guys remember that, a couple of weeks ago. Got him on the phone to do an interview for my blog, and then we pieced together this event in just a few weeks. So thanks so much to Golden Folk and the Gray Eagle for letting us piggyback on your evening. Jonathan is the senior research editor at Rolling Stone magazine. And again, this is his first book that came out in January. Please welcome Jonathan Bernstein.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you guys all so much for coming early to Golden Folk this month to listen to us talking about Justin. I was a huge fan of Justin Townes Earle. It's a huge honor to be sitting and on this stage talking about him in a place that meant I know so much to him. How many of you got to see Justin perform here? Anybody? Okay. Well, Justin, there are incredible clips on YouTube of Justin performing on this very stage, and it's a big honor. Thanks to Jay and Golden Folk and the Gray Eagle for having me. I'm going to start just by reading a really short passage, just like 2 minutes or so, that for anyone who doesn't know too much about Justin, but is here, hopefully gives a little bit of a kind of overall sense of who Justin Townes Earle was and why he mattered. And just to set it up very briefly, Justin, his whole, until he was about in his late 20s and started releasing records, he always went by Justin Earle. That was what everyone called him. And in fact, even when he started making music, he was a kind of local singer-songwriter in Nashville for about 10 years as Justin Earle. And my kind of, what I'm going to be reading in the introduction here starts at this specific moment when he's sitting in front of a computer one day with his friend, and they're trying to figure out what his first ever record, Yuma, what it should look like on the cover. And his friend knew that his full name was Justin Townes Earle and was like, what if we just put Justin Townes Earle? That looks pretty badass. And Justin was like, all right. And that is why, and sort of how he publicly became known as Justin Townes Earle. So this reading sort of starts at that exact moment. From then on out, Justin started building his own legend. He toured the country in a pickup truck. He shook hands and signed autographs and slicked back his hair and smiled wide. He started working and did not stop, releasing 4 records in 4 years, culminating in Harlem River Blues, which came out in 2010. That album arrived at the precipice of the most successful period of Justin's career, and although it also came amid a devastating personal crossroads, Justin's voice had found its moment. Harlem River Blues was a mix of rambling folk tunes about New York City set to Southern gospel music. It was released in the shaky period following the Great Recession. In those years, old-time conjuring music with banjos and fiddles enjoyed an unlikely resurgent mainstream popularity as groups like the Avett Brothers and Mumford & Sons presented bluegrass-infused music to pop audiences. With his sharp sense of fashion, commanding charisma, bad boy backstory, and knack for self-promotion, Justin Townes Earle seemed destined for the type of crossover stardom that would have plastered his 6'4" frame on college dorm room posters. He appeared on Letterman, won awards, packed large clubs, earned rave reviews, and was named one of the 25 most stylish men in the world by GQ magazine. All the while, Justin shared stories and cigarettes with his fans, befriended bouncers and bartenders, won over grandparents with his Southern manners, and seduced journalists eager to print his legend. Something about his mischievous grin and his disquieting openness about past demons made people fall in love with him. If he'd wanted to, said his longtime agent, Justin could have become governor. To anyone who saw him in the late 2000s, stardom didn't seem far-fetched. Justin Townes Earle was a lightning bolt of magnetism. Part vaudeville showman, part aw shucks country rube, part Grand Ole Opry showbiz act, part Depression-era carnival barker, and part revival tent prophet. But by 2013, just a few years after Harlem River Blues, Justin's career slowly started to recede. Back in 2008, he'd shifted his hardline definition of sobriety. He started smoking weed, and alcohol soon followed. Right as he was poised to seize his stardom, Justin succumbed again to the illness he had been fighting since he was a child. He entered rehab in 2010, just 10 days after releasing Harlem River Blues. The rest of Justin's life was a fight against and with his addiction. With the support of loved ones, he often made stunning strides and comebacks from places his addiction had brought him, even when many feared he'd never recover. He liked to claim, as a point of filial pride and connection with his father he so adored, that because Steve Earle had also survived many near-death scares, so too he, Justin Townes Earle, was invincible. Like his dad, Justin believed deeply in the power of sobriety, dishing advice and wisdom and serving as a model of inspiration for countless fans, fellow artists, and friends. But that didn't diminish his struggle. In his last couple years, the parts of Justin he had long fought to keep hidden started screaming to the surface. He began performing encores shirtless, his torso on full display, visibly incapacitated. The crowd stared at his middle name, Townes, etched onto his body. He had a tattoo of Townes right here that he got just days after kind of deciding that he should start going by it. On August 20th, 2020, Justin Townes Earle died at the age of 38 after purchasing cocaine he didn't know was laced with fentanyl. He'd grown estranged and detached from many of his friends and family, including his wife and young daughter, and was living alone in Nashville when he died in a sparsely furnished temporary apartment. His body was discovered 3 days later. Long before this myth ended in utter tragedy, Justin Townes Earle had begun the work of transforming his life into a legend. The teller of that legend seemed unusually forthcoming, but those who knew Justin most intimately understood that the heart-sick, smiley, bullshitting Nashvilleian contained even more within him than what Justin Townes Earle disclosed in public. He was hilarious, hard-edged, stubborn, silly, solemn, generous, exasperating, kind, commandeering, compulsively chatty, and chest-thumping. But beneath Justin's bluster was a fragile yearning and a desperate desire to make his hurt heard. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, wow. Thanks, John. And just to mention that Malaprops is here on site with books. Please pick one up on your way out. I'm sure John would gladly sign a copy for you.
Yep, I'll be signing after the event for sure, for anyone who wants to chat or a little note.
So, John, you were a big fan of Justin's, as you mentioned, and after he passed away, you were assigned to do a pretty in-depth feature on him for Rolling Stone. Is that right? And then how did that article sort of snowball into this book?
Yeah, so that's kind of, I was an enormous fan of Justin's music. I first saw him when I was in college in 2009 and was just like blown away. And so I followed his career, throughout the 2010s and was sort of the resident Justin Townes Earle fan on staff at Rolling Stone when he died, which is why they asked me. I wrote like a tiny little essay the day after he died, just honestly grappling with it and just writing about his music. And they were like, this person lived a pretty, he was an artist that we care about and he lived a profound life. Like, why don't you go do the Rolling Stone thing of just sort of talking to people and kind of reporting out this person's life and their death, but also their career. And that was kind of that was sort of like my biggest assignment in some ways at that time in my career at Rolling Stone. So I spent the fall of 2020 really talking to Justin's loved ones and his bandmates and kind of most crucially his widow, Jen Marie Earle, about him and about his music and his life. And I had been a big fan, but the minute I started talking to people, especially Jen, I realized like how little what little I thought I knew about Justin was sort of nothing compared to just the utter sort of profundity and complexity and sort of extraordinary nature of his life and his art. And I wrote that article, and I was really proud of it, but it was also the first time in my career where after I wrote it, I felt like it was barely sort of the beginning point, and like I sort of almost knew less about him than when I started. And I was kind of just, in short, sort of just couldn't stop thinking about Justin and the story that I had written, and couldn't help but think that he really deserved like a book length. He was an artist who really deserved a book length sort of exploration of his life. So that's kind of how this whole thing started for me, the last 4 or 5 years of my life.
And then you decided to get an agent and write a sample chapter to try to get a book deal. Is that correct?
Yeah, then I had never written a book before. This is my first book, so I tried to figure out how to do that, and asked friends and colleagues I knew who had written books. And yeah, it took about from me writing this article to like me finding out for officially that I was going to actually get to write this book and spend the next few years of my life doing it was like a 2-year process in total.
Yeah, wow. Well, how does your day job as senior research editor at Rolling Stone, and we talked a bit about this earlier as to what sort of your day-to-day looks like, which is fascinating, all the fact-checking and just the due diligence that goes into that. How did that benefit you in the process of researching and interviewing and writing this book?
Yeah, so my actual job is that I'm a fact checker at Rolling Stone. Research editor is a fancy word for that. And what that basically means is I take other people's journalism and I kind of assess it and go through it word by word and make sure that it's as accurate, fair, and truthful as possible. And I joked with many of the people that I interviewed for this book that like 10 years of working as a fact checker had hopefully prepared me for the gigantic task of fact checking the life of Justin Townes Earle. Justin was an incredibly colorful and magnetic teller of his own story, as anyone who ever has met him for 5 minutes or seen him perform live or watched 5 minutes of a YouTube clip can attest to. He told his own story in a very powerful and in some ways very open way. He also was totally full of shit and was a wonderful, he was a sort of spiritually Texan like his dad and told tall tales and made everything larger than life and sort of legendary, more so than the actual sort of oftentimes less fun truth was. So it was honestly, working as a fact checker, I think in some ways it was my biggest gift, because I was really prepared to try to do the thing of assessing, what the truth is, and also having that stand with what Justin's version of the story was. But also in many ways it was a real challenge for me, because I, at this point as a journalist, think like a fact checker, and there were some early drafts in this book where I really sort of pared down on this and found hopefully more elegant and more readable ways of doing this. But I had a close friend of mine read an early draft, and he was just like, man, you're kind of just nitpicking this guy's life like every minute. If he says I didn't want to be a killjoy, so I really tried to let Justin's version of his own life and his own story, I really tried to give that oxygen and let readers understand how Justin told his story, because I think it's really important to sort of understanding him, to know how he viewed his life and his upbringing. I also tried to show people where the actual truth was, and where that space in between those two things, where I think oftentimes kind of became, for me at least, the most interesting sort of territory to explore, sort of how Justin viewed the world. So just to give like one example, and there are hundreds, Justin, this is almost in some ways the most obvious example, but Justin talked about both of his parents in a very specific way. He kind of cast his dad as sort of this villainous, absent, famous rock star guy. And he cast his mom as this sort of heroic single mom who raised him against all odds and is the strongest woman he knew. And there are, for sure, elements of truth to both of those things. The reality of Justin's relationship to his parents, which is, I think, maybe the central theme of the book, but if not one of the central themes of his life, was something that I talked to, hundreds of people about. and the reality of his relationships to his parents is much more complicated than this, sort of hero-villain way that he told his story. So to use that as an example, like, I want to show readers this is how he viewed his life and narrated his life. Here's some of the reality, and also here's, like, what does it say about Justin, and why did he narrate his life in that way? So that was a lot of the process of kind of sorting through myth and fact and fiction during this process.
Speaking of his dad, you interviewed over 250 people for this book, which is just incredible. You did not get to interview Steve Earle. He declined. What was that like when you found out he would not be a part of this?
Yeah, I went into the process assuming that Steve, who also didn't want to talk to me for my Rolling Stone story and had basically, and respectfully, like, I don't question this decision in any way, had basically abstained from really ever talking about his son to a journalist, not fully on his own terms since his son had died. So I didn't expect Steve in many ways to speak with me. Throughout the whole process, everyone would be like, "Oh, Steve's going to talk to you," and I really never thought that he would. But in some ways, I was certainly, like, disappointed because I had spoken to so many people about this father-son relationship. It's a really unique, in some ways, really special relationship. Other ways, heartbreaking relationship, but a really interesting one. And I was very eager to get his side of the story, of course. But I think ultimately I was really, really focused on trying to have this book truly be a book about Justin that wasn't actually secretly a book about Steve Earle or didn't exist in the shadow of his father, because that's so much what Justin struggled with in his own life and his own career. And I really wanted Steve to just be the dad figure, in this book, and not speaking with him, I think in many ways helped me do that more easily than if Steve had, seduced me with hours and days of crazy storytelling that Steve Earle does.
It would have been the Steve Earle story, yeah. As you were digging into the research and the interview process for this, John, were there certain sort of aha moments that you came about through your interviews that influenced the direction that you took with this book?
Definitely. I learned most of the contents of this book, and I think most of what I feel like I've, as Justin's biographer, have learned about him as a human and as an artist, come from the people who did actually know him the best. And, most of the aha moments came during the interviews with ex-girlfriends, with his wife, with people who played in his band for 10 years or managed him. And, the crazy part of writing a book about Justin, it almost was a longer version of writing this story for Rolling Stone where, there's a way in which I feel today like I know him. There were so many shades to him, and I kept, I'd conduct my 194th interview and be like, someone would tell me some stuff that I just absolutely couldn't have imagined or didn't understand. So in short, I'm trying to think of a good aha example. I think that one of maybe the biggest aha, kind of like, honestly, as a fan, just thrilling moments that happened very early on in the process is I interviewed a woman named Molly Jones who had the almost sort of honor of getting to, I don't know if honor is the right word, but she dated Justin for a few years when he was sober. And so she had a very unique, like completely, his years when he was completely 100% sober. And so she had a kind of beautiful time with Justin and relationship to him as an artist and as a person. And she was one of the first, like, really substantial interviews I did for this book. And she's also a huge music fan and was very, like, had a close musical relationship with Justin. They really trusted each other as, her being like an opinion for him. And she handed me a thumb drive very early on of a bunch of demos and recordings and songs that I have never heard and that are not released. Wow. Of kind of that Justin was working on before Yuma, like just before Yuma, kind of like him in his bedroom or his little office in his house that they shared, just recording home demos. Some of those songs ended up on his first two records, and some, he probably would be mad if I heard, because I don't think he considered that his best work.
Sure.
But that was like one of the biggest aha moments and just revelations for understanding his process as a songwriter.
You were also granted access to his journals, his lyric journals, which I imagine was like cracking into a gold mine. So in addition to the interviews you did, you had access to his personal writings. What did those entries contribute to the book?
Yeah, the other huge moment was when his widow, Jen Marie, shared a large, like a big box this big full of journals, which by no means are they all of Justin's journals. And as the completest journalist, I am still frustrated that I know there are journals out there that I never got to see, and I don't know where they are. But they were, lyrics notebooks for maybe about half of his albums.
Wow.
And what those did for me was honestly, first and foremost, gave me such an appreciation for Justin as a writer and as a songwriter and as someone who took his art so seriously. There's a mundane element to his journal notebooks because he'll just be writing the song "Kids in the Street" for like 80 pages. He'll write it 80 different times. But you get to see how how seriously he took the writing process and specifically the revision process, and how he would, there are versions of that song in particular, which is a really beautiful song Justin started writing as like a teenager and then finished in his adulthood. And it's kind of this like memoiristic song about his childhood in Nashville and kind of growing up on the street, which he kind of did as a kid. And the early versions of that song are almost like a Rolling Stone, where there's like 30 verses of just kind of free writing about these different characters, and like 10% of them ended up in the song. But seeing how he had to arrive at that process and work through all of these probably mix of fictitious characters who are inspired by, real people from his childhood was totally like just revelatory and so thrilling as a fan.
Yeah, to get a real window into his creative process and see what was left on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
And the one thing I'll say about that too is it also bursted. Justin talked about songwriting like he just did it in his sleep, and he wrote 10 songs a year, and it was really easy, and he never wrote more than what was for a record, and he kind of made it seem very, cool and rock and roll, his writing style. He's like, I'll write a song on a cocktail napkin and stuff. Yeah. And seeing the reality of just this guy got up every day and worked and wrote, and that was really beautiful to me, honestly.
Kind of a related comment. So I did a story about Justin's Western North Carolina legacy, and it was a very rich legacy. And talked to folks at the Gray Eagle, including Sandlin Gaither, if you guys know Sandlin, fantastic photographer who tended bar here for 16 years. And speaking of writing, he said one memory he had of Justin was right when the notes feature in the iPhone came out. And he was just like, hey, man, look at this. Look what I can do. And he had been typing lyrics into his phone, which was pretty revolutionary at the time.
And that's allegedly how he wrote pretty much all of Harlem River Blues.
Oh, wow.
So if there's a Harlem River Blues notebook, I have not seen it on some old defunct iPhone.
When speaking of Asheville, many people might not know that he recorded his fourth album, the record after Harlem River Blues, here at Echo Mountain, after playing here a handful of times. What can you tell us about that experience, John?
Yeah, I'll talk just super briefly about Justin's ties to this region and this city. Justin started coming to sort of this broad area as a teenager. He spent a lot of time in Johnson City, Tennessee, and started kind of sort of living there with a songwriter a few years older than him named Scotty Melton. And Justin and Scotty co-wrote a lot of Justin's earliest and greatest songs. Rogers Park, Far Away in Another Town. A lot of really great, Lonesome and You. And so Justin started, it was a little bit of a second home for him. Justin dropped out of school when he was about ninth grade or so, and is shortly after dropping out of school as a ninth grader is kind of like going back and forth between East Tennessee and Nashville, where he grew up. And so he kind of develops a relationship to this region. Some of it is apocryphal. Justin, when he started touring, would introduce many songs by saying that the song is about a girl he met at an Asheville methadone clinic. I was not able to fact check that fully, but I would imagine that there's probably some elements of truth to it, as there almost always were in Justin's stories, and some elements of exaggeration. And as soon as he sort of starts taking his real national career with any degree of seriousness, he starts touring in Asheville. He comes here to this region as early as 2007, I think.
Tell us about that show that we uncovered at the Town Pump in Black Mountain in 2007.
Yeah, that's the first. This show at the Town Pump is the first documented show I can find that he played in the Asheville region. Though I would be surprised if it was actually the first time he ever played music here. But he went on this brief tour that he kind of hated, called the Sons of the Gun Tour. And it was him and this guy named Jubal Lee Young, who's the son of Steve Young, who's also in kind of Heartworn Highways, part of the kind of like Steve Earle 70s outlaw country scene. And they kind of packaged these two sons. It was like Justin's worst nightmare in a lot of ways.
It's a terrible tour name.
And it was a really bad tour name. Justin hated it like openly during the tour, and I think got into sort of conflict with Jubal during the tour in many ways. But that was the first documented show I can find that he played in Asheville. So this region was like very kind to him, and was from the very beginning of his career was like very important to Justin regionally. And then after Justin made Harlem River Blues, which was kind of his most well-known record, and a record that gave him a lot of notoriety and acclaim and did pretty well. It was his best-selling record at the time by a long measure. He wanted to make a little bit of a fancier record. He wanted to, increase his label's recording budget, and he knew he wanted to make a record with a horn section. He knew he wanted to cut a record like live to tape, sort of like old-fashioned way, and he knew he wanted to, for the first time, make a record not in Nashville. And he said that one of the inspirations for coming here to Echo Mountain in Asheville, which is this beautiful and wonderful studio, was that he really admired records that the Avett Brothers had made there, and also that one of his heroes, Malcolm Holcomb, had made here. And that was another tie that Justin from the beginning had to this region. He probably loved the city if for no other reason than its association with Malcolm Holcomb, who was one of his foremost inspirations, influences, and artistic heroes. So he brought his full band to Echo Mountain in the fall of 2011. They made the record "Nothing's Gonna Change the Way You Feel About Me Now" here, which is one of my favorite Justin albums. Amanda Shires sings and plays fiddle on that record. It's like an unbelievably incredible band, and it was only one of two records in his entire career that he made not in Nashville. And for him, I think it was a really, really important sort of left turn and change in his career. He never wanted to make the same record twice, and this record that he made in Asheville, almost more than any of his other ones, he was really proud of it for its boldness and for what he felt were all the sort of challenges that he gave himself of trying to do something really differently. And I think it's truly one of his greatest records that he made in the city.
Yeah, and speaking of Malcolm, the first time Justin played this stage was February 2008, opening for Malcolm, and played here at least once a year from then on out. One of my fondest memories is coming to see a show here in December of 2010 when we got a really kind of unexpected early winter snowstorm. And I was living in Montford at the time, and they did not cancel the show. There was probably a foot of snow on the ground. And I remember walking from our house in Montford over the bridge down the Clingman Hill, which was like a ski slope that night, and coming into the club in a seated environment like this. You could see your breath in the club. It was before the Graygle upgraded their heating system. That was when you had Bryn Davies on bass and Josh Headley on fiddle. It was an incredible, incredible show. John, you talk about this concept of the myth in the book that you really set up early on. Can you explain what the myth is and what you were hoping to accomplish by telling this story through that lens, and what you're also hoping to avoid?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the introduction in this book, I came across this phrase that Justin kept using sort of in his sobriety to describe kind of his mindset that he had earlier in his life. In his teenage years and adolescent years, Justin ran pretty wild around Nashville and really struggled with like a pretty scary amount of substance use for, a 15-year-old or a 19-year-old or a 21-year-old. And Justin once he got sober, he started to use this phrase, the myth, as a way of describing how he thought he had to be in order to become a great artist, or in order to even play the role of troubadour, folk singer, right? And I think any of us who like music and art are at least somewhat familiar with, this sort of vague romanticization of suffering for art, and how, great suffering produces great art. And Justin, a big part of him believed that, especially growing up. And his relationship to whether or not that was real or whether or not that was harmful nonsense, I think was kind of like a deep inner conflict that Justin had his whole life, really. And it was one that remained, until the end. So I thought it was a really helpful framing to, understand Justin's struggle and his inner life, because it was also sort of, in some ways, my struggle as a writer. I really wanted to tell a story that was truthful and empathetic and honest. I didn't want to kind of make it seem like Justin had a cheery, happy-go-lucky life, because he didn't. But I also really didn't want to write a book that inherently, or through the telling of some of the more difficult parts of Justin's life, glamorized his suffering or romanticized his suffering. And so it was something that it was my own inner conflict as a writer in writing Justin's story, and I tried to, both be really respectful and try to thread that needle between being honest and not focusing or dwelling on these things. So I hope in having written this book that people come away with, if anything, a more rich understanding and appreciation of Justin's art, first and foremost, but also just his humanity and his messy and beautiful and kind of extraordinary humanity, because he was a really profound human being, for lack of a better phrase. So that's a little bit what I was trying to do.
As a writer, was there a particular chapter of his career that was most intriguing to you?
I was from the beginning, perhaps I might have been influenced by this one early interview that I had and these early recordings that I got very early on of Justin's life. But from the beginning, I was really captured by these few years of utter sobriety that Justin had right before Yuma, his first EP, came out. And so 2005 and 2006, when he writes so many of what would become his greatest songs, and is just so not the Justin that he later sort of communicated to the world. He was the Justin that, went to 12-step recovery meetings every day, drove back home, and then watched movies and went out for ice cream and wrote songs every day. And I still am very touched and moved by that version of Justin. But yeah, there were so many. Should we go to questions?
Yeah. Anybody have questions for John?
Yeah, if
We've
anyone
got a
has
wireless
any
mic
questions,
here.
or even any Justin stories, but yeah, any questions about Justin or for Jay or anything like that. And it's okay if no one does.
Yeah, we can keep going if nobody has questions. Or think of a question then.
Yeah, while maybe someone is thinking of a question, I do want to mention if for any reason anyone here doesn't feel like they've gotten their Justin fill through this event and also this wonderful show that's going to happen afterwards, I am doing a similar thing of talking before a show tomorrow night in Johnson City, and Scotty Melton, the man who co-wrote so many of Justin's greatest songs, is going to perform a full set, so that should be pretty cool. The Down Home in Johnson City is a really special club in this region in Justin's history as well.
If there are no questions, I will thank John for making the trip to Asheville.
Oh, great.
Cool. I can't
see.
Sorry.
Yeah, so Stacey Earle is Steve's sister. Stacey Earle was playing at the Down Home. She's also a musician. She was playing at the Down Home in Johnson City the night that Justin met Scotty Melton. And she also was a real big artistic influence on Justin's guitar playing. Sadly, I did not ever speak to Stacey Earle. Though I don't know this to be the case, I think that Steve respectfully told his family to shut the fuck up and not respond to any communications with me, which was by and large the case with Justin's father's side of the family. So I nagged and sent many texts and voicemails and Facebook messages for Stacey Earle, but I was sad to not get to speak to her. She did, a lot of people did speak to, there's a biography about Steve Earle that came out about 20-something years ago, and Stacey and Steve and Justin all spoke extensively about sort of, Justin's family life growing up in the Earle family. I think they were perhaps even maybe a little too open with that journalist, which may have influenced their relationship speaking with me. But so I got to learn a lot about Stacey through, and her relationship to the family and to Justin through that book, but I didn't get to talk to her, unfortunately. Good question. She's a really, Stacey's one of a few people that had a real big role in raising Justin.
I see a hand raised over here.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
Yeah, awesome question. I'm decidedly not at work on another biography right now, though I would love to be one day, far many years from now. But yeah, I tried to read a lot of music biographies when in the early phases of this. Bob Muir's biography of The Replacements is amazing, and I really looked to it as a model specifically for how he lets the Replacements legend kind of like be the Replacements legend, but also kind of get under the hood of that legend and show there was a lot of really painful and dark stuff that undergirded that legend, and how he did that was like really a model that I tried to follow for Justin. There's this one biographer named R.J. Smith who he's written a bunch of books, but he specifically wrote 2 books about James Brown and Chuck Berry, who are, of course, is like titanic, historical figures in American history. So very different sort of task than writing a book about Justin in a lot of ways. But I just think he's like the greatest music biographer that I've ever read. Like I could not put his books down, and they were both incredibly researched, but read very like a novel kind of. So those are 2 that come immediately to mind for me.
This book also is incredibly researched and reads like a novel. So I invite everybody to pick up a copy in the back with malaprops, and please give John a big hand.
Thank you all so much for being here.
And thanks again to Clay and Luke from Golden Folk for letting us tack on to the evening.
Yeah, Golden Folk should be really special tonight, and there should be some Justin nods, I think, throughout the evening. And I will be back at the malaprop stand chatting and signing anyone's book for anyone who wants one. And I really appreciate you all coming out, truly.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
I swear I see her in my dreams sometimes, held up in the middle of the night, shaking like a pistol in a young man's hand there in the pale moonlight. Standing up atop of that lonely hill, spared by the company mine, is my blue-eyed baby with a best dress on in the shadow of a lonely pine. I'll be back before the war when the company came. These hills grew wild and free. Me and baby, we'd hide in the hollers low, away from the cruel sun's heat. But then they knocked down the timber and burned off the brush to get to the riches below. And when they pulled out, they left a cold black ground and one pine standing alone. So take me home, Lone Pine Hill. Now I signed up back in '61. I'm an Army of Virginia man. I've been from Manassas to McConaughey, all the way to Sailor's Creek, fighting for my homeland. I've been 4 years gone and all hope lost in Richmond under siege. And we're digging out 5 Forks, waiting in the rain for Sheridan to bring us to our knees. So take me home, Lone Pine Hill. There's a strange moon hanging overhead tonight, and if the rain keeps coming, then the creek's gonna with the good Lord's grace, I'll make it out of this place. I'll be in your arms come the morning light, I swear. So God grant me speed, grant me forgiveness, and carry me all through the night. Take me through your hills and over your rivers, away from this awful fight. 'Cause I ain't never known a man that's ever owned another, and ain't never owned nothing of my own. So after 4 long years, I just can't tell you what the hell I've been fighting for. So take me home, Lone Pine Hill. Well, he woke up that morning and he called into work, put on his daddy's old suit with a second-hand shirt, all untucked, his shoes untied, and people all snickered as he walked by, so he stopped.